left off with the Spanish conquistadors. All right, so can you go ahead and start it? Europeans realized the vast wealth that existed in the American continents after Columbus, right? We know Columbus, how many voyages? 4, very good. Even after the first voyage, Columbus is bringing back what? People and
diseases.
Well, yeah, for sure. He's also bringing back what? Where Spain's like, yes.
Like different materials from vegetables.
Yeah, he's bringing back all kinds of different plants and animals. But the most important thing to Spain that he brings back, gold, right? Even after the first trip, he's bringing back gold. And more gold is flooding in after those next 3 voyages, so much so that it sparks this age of exploration, this sort of exploration race that is mainly carried out by both Spain and Portugal. They're the 2 early participants in this exploration race. Do other countries get involved? Sure, right? England, they're kind of in the mix, but not like on a substantial level. They hire an Italian explorer by the name of Giovanni Caboto to explore after Columbus has success, but and Cabot is successful. We're going to talk more about him as we move forward, but England doesn't really follow up on their land claims for quite a while. So the gold and silver that's coming out of the advanced new world, like the advanced civilizations of the New World, is really going to ramp up this exploration race between both Spain and Portugal. One of the early edicts or treaties that was passed in the Old World to carve up the New World was the Treaty of Tordesillas, or the Treaty of Tordesillas. It was brokered in 1494. It divided up what they called the heathen lands, or basically the Americas, between Spain and Portugal. Interestingly enough, the person that was in charge of dividing up the land was the Pope, and the Pope that carved up, or at least ordered this decree or treaty, was Pope Alexander VI, who happened to be Spanish. So what country gets most of the land here? Spain. And when I say most of it, I mean, what you'll see here in a second where the treaty line was, they get a massive chunk of the New World. So the Spanish dominated New World exploration during the 1500s in the name of gold, God, glory. All right, this is the sort of, you're looking at this as like a 3-legged stool, so to speak. This is each legged stool. Gold, God, glory, that motivates them to explore into the unknown. This 100-year period, 1492 to 1592, truly is a golden age of exploration for Spain. Yes, Portugal is in the mix, and yes, they are becoming quite profitable in their endeavors, but Spain is going to dominate the scene. The conquistadors spread disease, established Christian missions, and enslaved the natives as a result of this golden age. Any questions up to this point? Am I moving too fast, or are we good? Is that good? Awesome. Cool. Okay. This is the Treaty of Tordesillas, or Tordesillas. Look at all this little chunk of land that Portugal gets. Now, this will be renegotiated later, and Portugal will get a larger chunk of land in what is now Brazil. They'll get parcels of land in South America, farther to the south, and they'll also get parcels of land in the Caribbean. Somebody asked me yesterday, what about all this up here? Well, this land up here is not really claimed yet. And once England and France and the Dutch get on the scene, the land up here and the islands in the Caribbean are going to be fought over to be able to expand their empires. Awesome.
How did the boat lay like borders when the maps were down?
Yeah, exactly. That's how the treaty had to be renegotiated. That's awesome point right there. Yeah, excellent. Like they don't the maps they have they're not useless, but I mean at this period of time they're just throwing out like sort of throwing out this like demarcation line that they have no idea what's beyond. Yeah. And then there's going to be more negotiation, especially between Spain and Portugal over that next 100-year period of who's going to get what. And then really, we're not going to see France and England are exploring in the 1500s, and the Dutch are as well. But we're really not going to see like their foothold in the New World until things start to go into decline for Spain. That's like the golden age for England and France and the Dutch. Well, the Dutch, I don't want to say that because the Dutch are kind of a little bit of a more tricky situation because the Dutch put so much of their emphasis on the East Indies initially. When they get to the Western Hemisphere, that's not going to be until like for England and France to the like toward the end of the 1500s, and for the Dutch toward the beginning of the 1600s. That makes sense. But I don't. The Dutch are it's a little more complicated for them because it's going to make more sense as we move into the next part of the lesson on Tuesday. But I am going to touch on we've all heard of joint stock companies, right? I'm going to touch on that today as well. But yeah, this isn't like, that's not going to just like stay firm. So that's a really good question. Okay. I don't want this to be overwhelming. There is intent behind each one of these explorers. I didn't pick these explorers at random. They all have a purpose in this portion of the lesson. So if you're looking at your review and you're wondering, like, where do I find more information about these explorers from my review, this is where you're going to find it in the lesson. So the first conquistador that we're going to talk about is Vasco Núñez de Balboa. Balboa is following up on the claims that were laid by Columbus in his final voyage, where he is going to explore along Central America and Panama. A little background on Balboa. Balboa's family had been pretty, had come from pretty humble origins. However, they had got involved in the Spanish defeat of the Islamic Moors, which had improved their wealth and status as a family. So Balboa is going to use that as an opportunity to start exploring as a result of this. So Balboa will follow up on Columbus's claims in Central America. He will cross the Isthmus of Panama, and he actually loses a whole lot of his crew because does anybody know what the terrain looks like in the Isthmus of Panama? It's like full-on swamp jungle. So we're talking about malaria, other diseases, poisonous snakes, exposure to other elements along the way. but they will be the first group of Spaniards to successfully make it across the isthmus and arrive at the Pacific. And what Balboa will do is give Spain claim to the Pacific pretty much from Central America, Panama, all the way up to the Pacific coast of California. So that is a huge land claim for Spain. Balboa returns back to Panama. He'll launch another expedition with another crew, but as you might imagine, these conquistadors start to become rivals because there's a lot of greed and also a lot of jealousy during this period of time, going back to the whole golden glory bit that we talked about earlier. And in order to be able to launch an expedition, you had to have consent from the crown. And this particular expedition had not received the consent of the crown, so that gave Balboa's rivals the ability to arrest him for treason and for usurping the Spanish crown, and he was tried and executed in present-day Panama by his rivals. It's interesting, the ways in which most of these conquistadors died, they were either attacked and killed by their rivals, their own countrymen. They were attacked and killed by natives, or they died of what? Disease. That's typically how these folks got taken out.
So did he die in 1519, or was that just from like the trial?
Yeah, he was executed not long after the trial.
Okay.
Yep. All right. And how could the crown really help him out? They're 3,000 miles away, right?
I don't even know this happened.
Yeah. Juan Ponce de Leon. Juan Ponce de Leon had explored with Columbus. His status really skyrockets. He ends up becoming a royal governor in what is now Puerto Rico, and he is going to launch an expedition north with the consent of the crown to present-day Florida. There was this sort of myth that there was a golden city in north of Florida, what we would now consider southern Appalachia, this golden city of Appalachia. So we know without a doubt that Juan Ponce de Leon is in search of gold. Is he in search of the fountain of youth? We don't know. Scholars and historians have sort of debated this for quite a while. Has anyone ever been to St. Augustine before? Hey, pretty cool, huh? Good times. St. Augustine's definitely capitalized on this because Juan Ponce de Leon lays claim to what will become the settlement of St. Augustine. When you visited, did you visit the old Spanish citadel that's there? Pretty amazing. That's awesome. So if there was a huge fort or fortress built there that still stands, this settlement was mainly built for what? If there's a fortress there. Crew? Anybody? Why would you build a fort somewhere? What would you be building the settlement for? Yeah, it's built for defense. It was built for military defense. And it's built not just for defense against natives, but it was also built for military defense against rival countries, pirates, notably France and England. So St. Augustine is going to be the oldest continuing settlement in the continental U.S. Also, another important note, Juan Ponce de Leon is the first European that is recording the Gulf, sort of the use of the Gulf Stream. Are y'all familiar with the Gulf Stream? Okay, it's like a super highway current that travels from like all the way up the Atlantic coast. Do I have any fishermen in the house? They like to fish? Okay. The Gulf Stream's sought after for deep sea fishing because massive fish cruise through the Gulf Stream. So this was like really plentiful for fishing. Juan Ponce de Leon figures that out. It's also a good current to move for explorers to explore farther north. However, Leon and his conquistadors and the local natives of southern Florida, they did not hit it off too well, which was pretty normal for the conquistadors. The tribe that dominated southern Florida was the Calusa tribe. They hit Juan Ponce de Leon with a poison-tipped arrow, and he died in Cuba. Somebody yesterday asked me, like, how did they poison their arrows? They poisoned their arrows with venom. They also poisoned their arrows with other concoctions that were made. Also, a pretty gross way in which arrows were poisoned. This is a little bit sick, but you're between meals right now. They would dip their arrow in animal or human feces, and they don't understand germ theory, but they do know that if they hit somebody with that arrow and it's like a gut shot, that person's not going to recover. So that was a common occurrence. Battle over thousands of years. Okay, any questions about Juan Ponce de Leon? All right, so Florida, the land of flowers. Juan Ponce de Leon and his crew will coin that name. It also coincided with a very important Christian holiday in the springtime, when they're Easter, yeah. So that's part of the naming of Florida, of flowers or the land of flowers. All right, Magellan. Okay, Magellan is Portuguese by birth, but hired by Spain. How do you think this went over in Portugal?
They were really bad.
They were not happy. This was not a good situation. They saw Magellan as a traitor. So Magellan is going to take 5 ships, and he sets out to circumnavigate the globe. This is rough going. They're going to explore along much of the east coast of South America. They're going to cut through the Straits of Magellan. This is when one of their ships heads back to Europe. One part of the crew mutinied and left. 4 ships will continue. They lose, one more ship along the way. They finally arrive in the Philippines, where they do not have a great relationship with the natives in the Philippines. And much like Juan Ponce de Leon, Magellan is hit with a poison-tipped arrow and is killed. The crew takes off. They lose 2 more ships. And then finally, 1 ship and a small amount of the crew return. This will be the first recorded circumnavigation of the globe. But I have a pretty good feeling, and I'm sure you do too, that the globe was likely circumnavigated before. Probably by groups we've talked about before, likely by Africans, the Polynesians, probably the Vikings, but this is the first time it's recorded. I find it ironic because, as children, we're like, who was the first person to circumnavigate the globe? And everybody's like, Magellan, yeah. No, he didn't make it. He made it to the Philippines, but was killed there. What does this allow Spain to do in Indochina? What do they lay claim to? The Philippines. Yeah, that's a story we're going to talk more about as we move forward, because Spanish claims in the Philippines are going to play a really big role for us as we move into next semester.
What are the different
All right.
on that map?
Hey, welcome. Good to see you.
founded by different people?
The
I was in the clinic.
you're gonna you go. Are you?
Yeah, just headaches. I won't be marked absent, right?
I'll fix it.
Okay.
Yep, no worries. This is a really good question. I will double check that for you. Yeah, I'll have to go back to that because I have that map saved in my files. So
Yeah.
I'll be able to put a note in, and I'll actually add a note in here.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. Okay, Hernan Cortez. Cortez conquered the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan, present-day Mexico City, between 1519 and 1521. I don't really want to get too in depth on Cortez because I am going to talk about Cortez as one of our key case studies when I see you guys next class. So he's one of these conquistadors. This is like all of his tactics were just like so low down and dirty. Like, for example, when he set out from Cuba, he did not have consent of the crown. There was another person that had consent to do this expedition, and the guy mysteriously died. And then Cortez took off with 500 conquistadors, attacked on his horses, and weapons. And he just absolutely pillages and plunders all through the Yucatan. And then when they get to Veracruz, I'm like getting way ahead of myself. They get to Veracruz, they establish like a Spanish province, and they're like, okay, we now have a Spanish province, and by popular vote, we would like to vote Hernan Cortez as our leader and captain in order to prevent himself from lining up like Balboa and getting like arrested for treason. So, again, I've got a more detailed story related to Cortez when I see you next. His expedition led to the fall of the Aztec Empire. More details to come, but Cortez's brand of conquest becomes the how-to guide for future explorers because he writes a book that becomes published, and I wouldn't call it a bestseller. It was a bestseller among would-be sailors, navigators, and explorers, and it was widely circulated. But it wasn't like everybody was like grappling for a copy of Cortez's book. But I guess you could call it a bestseller. I don't know if I would go that far. So more details to come related to Cortez. Francisco Pizarro. A decade later, Pizarro, using many of the same tactics that Cortez used, will set out to conquer the Inca. There had been news in Central America and in the Yucatan and in central Mexico, Aztec country, that an empire that rivaled that of the Aztec existed in South America in present-day Peru. And I'm talking like from, we're talking like almost the entire west coastline of South America. So Pizarro puts up a lot of his own money for this expedition. There's another really important guy that puts up a lot of money too. His name is Hernando de Soto. So we're going to talk about him momentarily. And what will occur a decade later, Pizarro and his conquistadors will capture and kill the Incan Emperor Atahualpa, claim the lands of the Inca, notably Peru, for Spain. The capital of New Spain in North America was what is now present-day Mexico City, and the capital of New Spain in South America is what is now Lima, Peru. However, Pizarro met a similar fate to what Balboa met, and he was assassinated by El Mozo, who was the son of one of Pizarro's rivals in the conquistador world of South America. He was assassinated in Lima in 1542. We're going to talk more about Pizarro as we move forward as well. He's a part of our case study, like 2 case studies, the conquest of Pizarro and the conquest of Cortez. Or I guess I should say the conquest of Cortez and later the conquest of Pizarro. Any questions up to this point? Is everybody good? All right. Now we move on to Hernando de Soto, one of our most ruthless conquistadors, a student of both Cortez and Pizarro, and the right-hand man to Pizarro in the conquest of the Inca. De Soto has a pretty interesting story. He's kind of like Pizarro. He came from pretty humble beginnings. Pizarro grew up a swine herd. What does that mean? Yeah, a pig farmer. And De Soto grew up on a farm as well, but De Soto left the farm at the tender age of 15 to start exploring. So by the time he gets involved in the Pizarro expedition, he's a veteran conquistador, and he had gained quite a bit of personal wealth by that time. But then the success of the Incan conquest is gonna now De Soto, this guy doesn't ever have to do anything ever again. Like after the Incan conquest, De Soto goes back to Spain, marries the daughter of the first conquistador who hired him, and he's like living a life of luxury, has a family, and then the king of Spain sort of taps him and says, hey, we'd like for you to go back. We want you to become the royal governor of Puerto Rico. So De Soto goes back, but then plans change. And the plan is that he couldn't really help himself. After a year of preparation and a year of governing Puerto Rico, De Soto is going to decide to follow up on Juan Ponce de Leon's expedition and seek out the golden city of Apalachee. Does he find it? No. Is there gold in Appalachia? Sure. But there's not like large veins and deposits of gold throughout Appalachia. So this is just not really working out the way he'd anticipated. And it's easy for us to kind of look at this and be like, oh, how dumb is that? But if you had seen the Aztec Empire or you had seen the Incan Empire, why wouldn't others exist? Does that make sense? It's like you have no choice but to venture into the unknown for the next El Dorado. De Soto was ruthless. Used attack dogs like Cortez had used against natives, horrible abuses, mutilation of the natives along the way. He will explore, he'll be the first European, or at least recorded European, to reach the Mississippi. He will also cross the Mississippi and will explore parts of Louisiana. This is where he'll die of disease. This creates a pretty interesting dynamic because numerous people are going to be laying claim to what will become Louisiana. Notably, Spain and what other country? France. Very good. Anybody been to New Orleans? Good time down there? Bit of a melting pot, right? You've got the Spanish, the French, the African, the Creole, the Cajun, the English, all types of cultures coming together in that city. This is our last guy. And this is all going to make sense momentarily. Francisco Coronado. Coronado is following up 20 years later on the expeditions of Cortez. Now, once Cortez takes control of central Mexico, Cortez is going to dip south and explore and conquer Honduras. There had been very little movement and conquest to the north. And there were now new rumors of more golden cities to the north of the Aztec Empire. Thank you very much. And that is going to be the area in which the Pueblo lived. And the goal here was to conquer the Pueblo and to take control of their golden cities. Did they have any golden cities? They did not. But what they do come across is the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River Valley, large herds of bison, and it also gives them claims to really everything from Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, all the way to Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Kansas. All right. So this is where I pump the brakes today. The economic effects of the conquistadors. The flood of precious metal touched off a price revolution in Europe. Prices rose on average roughly sixfold over a 150-year period. This is an inflation rate of 1 to 1.5% per year for 150 years. Consumer costs over a 100-year period rose by 500%. Many scholars, like Scottish economist Adam Smith in the early 1800s, would point back to this ballooning money supply in Europe as the fuel that helped ignite modern capitalism in Europe and globally. New World bullion, gold and silver, transformed the world economy, and it also laid the foundation for modern commercial banking. Also, it laid the foundation for the creation of what were called joint stock companies, meaning that people could come together and invest their money into expeditions in hopes of a return. These were the countries that really took off on the commercial banking and the the commercial banking and the joint stock ventures, France, England, and Holland. Silver opened up international trade with Asian merchants. Caribbean islands are going to be fought over because they're great places for storage. They were great jumping off points for conquest, but it also led to the spread of what was called the encomienda system. The other thing that the Caribbean does is it is going to be the perfect nest for would-be pirates. So we're now about to move into the golden age of piracy as well. All right? So, encomienda. What is this? This is a system that the Spanish government used that allowed them to issue native slaves to settlers with the promise that those slaves would be Christianized, converted to Catholicism, and then they would gain their freedom. Do you think that that promise was fulfilled? Rarely, okay? This leads to a far worse system, the Asiento system. This is the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade of not only the trade of native slaves throughout the Caribbean and beyond, but also the movement of West African slaves to the Americas. So this is where it should all come together. The reason that I chose those conquistadors to highlight, guys, is because all of this in red, right? Those explorers that we discussed today gave Spain this foothold. Just that group. And we're just like scratching the surface. There's a whole lot more conquistadors that we could have covered. but time just doesn't allow it. We have a lot to cover in this course. This is kind of cool. Spanish gold bars recovered from a shipwreck in the Gulf of Mexico. Has anyone ever been to Key West before? If you ever go to Key West, there's this really cool museum called the Mel Fisher Museum. I know this sounds super nerdy, but you guys should think about visiting if you get the chance, because it's like a museum just full of artifacts that have been pulled from shipwrecks off the coast of Florida in the Caribbean. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Okay, cool. So, any questions for me? Is that it?